Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us. I want to welcome all of you to the Hidayah Capital Group Cybersecurity webinar presented in partnership with RCS Professional Services and Friedman LLP. My name is Molly. I'm here with Hidayah Capital. We hope you find today's webinar insightful and helpful to your business. If anyone has any questions throughout the webinar, please feel free to send it to me directly through the question box, and I'll share it with today's panelists. Finally, I'd like to introduce Jack Hidayah from the Hidayah Capital Group, who could share more about their business.
Thank you, Molly. My name is Jack Hidayah, one of the founders and principals of the Hidayah Capital Group. Welcome to the Cybersecurity, The Road Ahead, the third of the four-part series that we put together to address some of the major transitions, challenges, and opportunities that are going on in the consumer product space. The next webinar will deal with branding. The Hidayah Capital Group has been in business for almost 20 years. We provide factoring, working capital, business advisory, and a strong network to growing consumer brands across many industries such as apparel, fashion, electronics, home, and home decor. We specialize in lines of credit supported by receivables, inventory, and purchase orders for finance for growing companies, selling to both brick and mortar and e-tail platforms. Our solutions are tailored to meet the client's needs. We look forward to connecting. If there's anything we can do to service your business, please reach out to Erwin Dayan. I want to thank our partners that have made this event possible: RCS Professional Services, Victory Insights LLC, Edwards Performance Solutions, and Cyzen, a Friedman LLP company. Thank you for joining us. I hand things off to Erwin, Vice President of Business Development and Marketing at the Hidayah Capital Group. He will be moderating today's panel. Erwin, take it from here.
Okay, thanks so much, Jack, and thanks everybody for joining us today on continuing our series from on cybersecurity. We started off with the future of retail, and then we got into logistics. Today we're doing cybersecurity, and in the next couple of weeks you'll be notified about our branding and licensing event, as well as our Deal Maker Summit, sometime the end of September, October. Today's topic is extremely important to everybody in business. We've put together an incredible panel of people that will address a lot of the issues that are going on. I'd like to thank Jeffery Tebele and Esther Deutsch of RCS, who've been a very important behind the scenes production and supervising our programs. And of course, I'd like to give a big shout out to Molly, our producer. So that being said, I'd like to introduce the panel, and we'll start off with Jeffery Tebele, President and CEO of RCS Professional Services.
Hey, everyone, how you doing?
Doing great, Jeff.
What's going on? So my name is Jeffery Tebele from RCS Professional Services. We're a managed IT service provider serving small and mid-sized businesses. We have offices in New York and Georgia. We help clients leverage technology in their business so that they could provide great results for their customers and their company. And most importantly, it has to be done in a safe way, which we're going to talk about today. Cybersecurity is rampant. You read it in the article, in the paper every day. You hear it on the news. We're really excited to talk about this topic. Thank you for having us, Erwin. And thank you for putting it together.
Thank you for all your support, you and Esther. So next is Mark Dallmeier, founder and CEO of Victory Insights. Mark.
Awesome. Erwin, Jack, hey, thanks for having me. Appreciate the opportunity to speak on this topic. I am an analyst and a researcher in the industry. I've been in technology for over 25 years, and I've held a variety of CSO and CMO roles for different cybersecurity risk and compliance companies. Again, thanks for having me. Excited to hear the rest of the topic.
Great. Okay, thank you. Next on board is Joy Beland, Senior Cybersecurity Consultant at Edwards Performance Solutions. Hi, Joy. Oh, wait, hold it. Audio.
We go. All right. The old.
Okay.
You're
Hi,
on
we'll try again. Hi, Joy.
Hi, everybody. Thanks for having me. Yes, I'm with Edwards Performance Solutions, and I am a senior cybersecurity consultant and professional instructor with them. Currently, I'm serving to help protect the nation's defense industrial base with cybersecurity and assessments, and professional training. And prior to that, for 23 years, I've worked in cybersecurity and helping to support the IT infrastructures of small businesses. So it's an honor to be here. Thanks for having me.
Thank you. Thank you. And last on our panel is William Mendez, who's the Managing Director of Operations at Cyzen, a Friedman company. So, hi, Will.
Hi, Erwin, and thank you everyone for having me on this panel. My name is Will Mendez, and I'm the Managing Director of Cyzen, who is a Friedman company, and we specialize in providing cybersecurity services to various types of organizations, and just to help them navigate the challenges on how they better to secure themselves against these emerging threats. I've been in the industry for over 15 years, both in the public sector, in the Department of Defense, and obviously in the private sector, trying to help clients in both sectors, meet their cybersecurity needs. And I'm happy to be here. Thank you for having me.
Thank you. Okay, so we're going to get the show on the road. First question we have is to Jeffery Tebele. What is a cyber attack? How does it work? Why is it important? And Jeff, walk me through how it happens.
Sure. So cyber attack, I mean, just to keep it plain and simple, it's basically a business's systems have been compromised, meaning they've been broken into or information has been exposed. What it is exactly, or have a little more detail on that from that high level, is there's a few common ones that we deal with in our company, and there's some that we don't necessarily deal with. Maybe you read in the paper yesterday, T-Mobile had like a big breach with millions of subscribers. Personal information was leaked out, Social Security, and other information. Those are generally breaches of, internet-facing websites potentially, or other like much larger scale cyber attacks. Those our firm doesn't deal with much, but that's one example that you've heard in the news, now, 5 years ago, 10 years ago, even since the dot-com era became a thing. The other two that we see a lot in our firm, the first one I would say is business email compromise is what it's called. Which an email box for some sort of corporation or even individuals, we've seen it, are basically broken into, meaning the password's been discovered, some evil actors going in a person's email and sending out communication without them knowing through slick techniques like, mailbox rules and forwarders and stuff like that. And basically they perpetrate to be someone that they're not, and then do bad things like asking people to wire them money, and the suspect or the targets that it goes to think they're talking to the actual person who's sending the email. That's not sending the email, I should say, but rather an evil actor. That's number one. We've seen, money go out the door, hundreds of thousands, millions of dollars, happens all the time. I'm sure you probably heard stories from friends and family. The other thing that we see is a ransomware attack that's been the most popular money-making operation for these evil actors. And basically what that is via an attack vector of different kinds, right? Could be email, could be virus on a computer. It could be just weak and not hardened systems that are the doors wide open, basically. And what happens with those is evil actors get into a network, and these are small to large networks, where they get they connect to these networks, and they basically camp out there, get an idea of what's going on, and then overnight, generally we see on nights or weekends, they will basically cripple the system by encrypting all the files on the network, and then the systems are inoperable. And what happens with that is the business can't operate at that point, because these are critical systems that they rely on for order processing, EDI, email, any integral system to a business. And what's happening is you're seeing a lot of ransoms being paid, and we're reading that in the paper. So those are the most common attacks that we see and hear about.
Okay, great. Thanks, Jeff. So the next question is to Mark, and Jeff touched on it. So I'll ask it to Mark again, and I'm going to just load another question in there. What are some examples of the business email compromise, which Jeff talked about? But I'd like to throw this in to Mark as well. Could you provide some insight into how the dark web and the cyber criminal groups are evolving?
Yeah, you bet. So let me build upon what Jeffrey already communicated. So a business email compromise attack is a fraud-based attack. And these attacks are typically conducted by sophisticated organized criminal groups operating on the dark web or hacking groups. And they're using email to trick employees into sending fraudulent payments or disclosing information, maybe sending an export of a database of clients or employees which has personal identifiable information or highly sensitive information about customers or employees. To Jeffrey's point, oftentimes organizations don't have the internal controls or policies and procedures to prevent an employee from sending this type of information to a malicious actor. So these malicious actors are impersonating executives. They could be impersonating vendors or partners or maybe somebody in your supply chain. And business email compromise fraud can result in devastating financial losses for organizations. There are a lot of different examples globally. So for example, in Puerto Rico lost over $4 million across 3 different business email compromise attacks. Norway State Investment Fund was taken for about $10 million in a business email compromise attack. So I think what we need to be conscious about is these attacks are not slowing down. They're actually increasing in frequency and in damages. Based upon the FBI's Internet Crime Complaint Center, or the IC3, the FBI's IC3 received over 19,000 business email compromise or email account compromise complaints in 2020. Now that was up from 16,000 the year before, and the total adjusted damages that the FBI projected was about 1.8 billion in damages, and that was up from 1.6 billion the previous year. So again, what's interesting about business email compromise, just like ransomware and other attacks, is we're seeing this multi-year, year-over-year compounded growth rate. 4 or 5 years ago, business email compromise damages were about 300 million to 500 million. And again, I'm just talking about the US sources of information, not the global sources of information. So again, these types of attacks could be somebody impersonating your CEO, and the person impersonating the CEO reaches out to the CFO or an admin or an executive assistant and says, hey, I need an export of the client database. I'm on the road. I can't get to the systems. I'm locked out. Please email me the export. Or maybe they're working on a deal. Hey, I'm out in the field. I forgot to tell you, we need to wire transfer $25,000 into this bank account. It's for a strategic partnership I'm working on. Please do this today. So some of the things that we find in terms of business email compromise attacks are there's a massive sense of urgency from the attacker, and they're basically trying to disrupt that the individual that's receiving the email's workflow, and they're causing them to not slow down, to not think, and to not double check the message. So sometimes they send multiple emails repeatedly until you respond, right? So there's this heightened sense of urgency, and that's one of the telling signs that, hey, this is probably a business email compromise attack, right? Because just people are they're just not that over the top in terms of, hey, you didn't respond to my email 5 minutes ago, and you better respond in the next 2 minutes. So, so we're seeing a lot of trends, a lot of growth around business email compromise. And I touched on something a little bit earlier as I walked through that. The way to address business email compromise is, number one, to plan for it. because it's not a matter of if, it's when. But number two, look at your internal controls, look at your internal policies and procedures around how are you protecting sensitive data and who are you sending or allowing access to your systems and sensitive data to, and then have some type of business process or procedure which says if somebody requests access to file systems, to information, to wire transfers, etc., then there's a approval process, a manual approval process that has to take place, and you typically want to get somebody on the phone. And again, this is happening across all industry segments, so it doesn't really matter what vertical industry you're in, you're being attacked. Now, Erwin, to answer the second part of your question in terms of how is the dark web evolving,
Right.
what we need to consider is the criminal economy that's developed has been estimated to about $1.5 trillion globally. That matches or surpasses the GDP of Russia. And this is just within the last 10 years. So think about this. So the dark web, criminal syndicates, hacker groups are mobilizing, using the dark web, under the veil of the dark web, okay? And they're organizing. So we have seen the industrialization of criminal activity on the dark web. So what do I mean by that? Well, we had the Industrial Revolution, right? Think about the manufacturing sector and how over a span of 20 to 40 years, the manufacturing sector had evolved from, assembly lines, manual assembly lines, to technology and automation-driven assembly lines, right? Where now some assembly is completely automated through robotics, right? And automation. So if you think about that 20 to 40 year time window that we saw at the beginning, right, part of the last century, and then you take a look at the advancements in technology that we've seen since the 50s of just, mainframe, client server, right, cloud, now this kind of ubiquitous technology connectivity that we have. Think about how many years has gone by, right, and what that span looks like, and then compare that against the dark web. So you now have criminal syndicates and hacker groups that are offering crimeware as a service, ransomware as a service offerings. They have full call centers and support systems set up. So you don't even have to be a hacker or an engineer. What you need is three things. You need to have malicious intent. You need to have access to the dark web, and you need access to cryptocurrency. And you can form a partnership on the dark web with a criminal group who will design and launch and execute a ransomware attack for you.
Wow.
They will help you source a stolen database, and then you can split the proceeds with this hacker group. And there are money laundering, so cryptocurrency laundering mechanisms on the dark web that are now integrated with physical criminal groups in the street. So you can convert cryptocurrency to stolen goods, or you can convert cryptocurrency through one of these mechanisms to local currency. This is a fully integrated supply chain that's been developed in the last 10 years. And again, it's now 1.5 trillion estimated from an economics perspective. So this is why this is not going away. And this is why it's really important for all of us to rethink how we're trying to not just defend and protect our businesses,
Right.
but how are we going to survive going forward over the next decade, Canada? So thanks for the question.
Amazing, mind blowing. So that leads me to the next question, which this is Joy's question, which is that's where when I hear all this, I feel like the Aflac duck, like I don't know what's going on. It seems no matter how many tools we install to protect the business world, we still run the risk of exposure. Why are we not making progress against this, Joy?
Yeah. Well, first of all, Mark, well done and well said. That was an excellent breakdown of what we're seeing, really. And the problem is tools, part of it. That people are thinking that their IT department has them covered just with the installation of tools. And this is very much a human, cultural, and behavioral problem. And I'll just borrow Mark's example of the auto industry and the manufacturing lines. If we just look at 1968, I think it was, when the first legislation came out that people had to wear a seatbelt when they were driving their car. But it was 1991 before all states had adopted that for all passengers in a vehicle. And the reason that 23 years went by in that process is that getting people to change their behavior and inconvenience them when they're not quite sure that they understand or that the risk applies to them is a really difficult thing to do. So we have awareness is growing exponentially around the cybersecurity issues. You know, it used to be the big buzzwords were always cybersecurity awareness, make sure that you're training your users. The fact is that's not nearly enough. Our culture, our society has to learn, number one, to give permission to the employees to say no or to pause instead of trying to be immediately responsive to a request, especially when somebody's being demanding or they're a really time-sensitive issue, like Mark had alluded to. Number two is that, you know, we have so much stress and distractions, especially around working in these hybrid environments and with COVID and remote workers and on-site workers and every different kind of device. People need to slow down, and it's really hard to slow down when all you want to do is exactly the same thing you've done for 20 years and hit respond and do an email or click and yeah, okay, they want me to log into this, I'll log into this. You know, people just want to get it done, and they don't understand the implications behind those very subtle decisions that they make on the fly. So what I'm trying to do and what I see that Esther and Jeffrey are trying to do and the cyber consultants out there in the world is have them understand every single action you take around technology, every single decision has to be reframed slightly now. You know, it's like we have to assume people are out to get us instead of assuming that our job is to give them everything that they ask for. And that's a really hard thing for a human being. I mean, it's really goes against the grain for so many of our business decisions day in, day out, even our own personal confidentiality and privacy decisions. Is we have to understand that pausing, getting the proper training, getting the ability and permission to pause and say no, that's going to be the most important thing in our cultural shift that needs and must happen in order for us to get a handle on this.
Great, thanks so much, Joy. Okay, next question that I think Jeff touched on, and a couple of the other panelists is for Will, is why is ransomware such a popular and effective attack?
Thank you, Erwin. And yes, I mean, Mark touched on it as well. And it's plain and simple. It's really money, right? Because when you look at what's happening out there, when you look at these threat actors, who's the number one threat actor that is performing a lot of these attacks, the majority of them are cyber criminals. And the main motivator is financial. So they're really in it for the money. And when you look at ransomware, it's basically extortion. You know, extortion has been around forever. It's just a matter that now it's in the form of a ransomware, and it has evolved significantly. But you know, you're taking something valuable, you're preventing access to it, and you're forcing the victim to pay you some sum of money. In the case of ransomware, it's, you know, cryptocurrency because of its anonymity. You know, it's harder to trace. But you know, the attack is still the same. It's a classic attack that you're looking to extract money from your victim. The other aspect about ransomware is that it's something that's easily monetizable. So let's say, for example, a hacker breaks into your organization. They steal the information. They still have to get a buyer for that information. They have to post it on the dark web. They have to find somebody that's willing, that finds it valuable, and then they'll get their money. From a ransomware attack, you get it directly from the victim. Now, obviously, there's other ways, other attacks where you get it directly from the victim, if it's a business email compromise or fraudulent transactions. But ransomware allows you, it's in that category where you're getting that money directly from the victim. The other aspect about ransomware, it's evolution. And Mark touched on it, you know, ransomware as a service. You no longer have to be, you know, a seasoned hacker to perform these types of attacks. You know, with ransomware as a service, you go onto the dark web, you use their platform. It's equivalent to like, using Google or Amazon. You have IT support and all that, and basically they get a cut of whatever the ransom is. So it has evolved significantly. So that's how it's evolved from a technical aspect, but even some of the techniques. So you hear a lot about double extortion. So when it used to be with ransomware, you'll lock up the system, the victim pays you, and ideally they get their system back. Nowadays, because the goal is to make, to entice that victim to pay that ransom, you have the concept of double extortion. They're already in your environment. So what they do is they take the information out, they exfiltrate it, take it out of your environment, they post it somewhere. And when you get that ransom note, they say, hey, not only will you, if you don't give us the ransom, you're not going to get your data back. But by the way, we already have your data. We're going to release it publicly. So that's a way of enticing the victim to help pay for that ransom. And then one of the other things you have to look at is in the techniques is when they're in your environment, they're also looking, because again, remember, the ultimate goal is payment of that ransom. So they're looking in your environment because ransomware has different phases associated with it. One of the phases, because they have access, they're looking for information that can help them, convince you to pay that ransom. So for example, what if you put your cybersecurity policy on your hard drive somewhere? They find that, they're looking at it, they know how much your insurance is going to pay because of this ransomware attack, and they're going to go ahead and put that ransom somewhere, along the same amounts, because again, the ultimate goal is to get you to pay for that ransom. So it's very sophisticated. And then the last thing I'll say, just to touch a little bit on what Joy mentioned, with the tools and just the culture and with folks, is that we have to think of security as a process. It's not really a tool. Tools are part of that process, but people are part of that process as well. And when you look at it as a process, then you're able to put the appropriate controls, whether it's people, education, whatever the case may be, in that process to help you protect yourself against attacks like ransomware.
That's great. Thank you. All right. The next couple of questions are really for the entire panel. You could jump in wherever you feel, or you could rotate it. But one of the key questions was, can you give us a real example of a recent cyber attack? So whoever wants to take it.
If you guys don't mind, if you guys don't mind, I'll jump in.
Go ahead.
Yeah, William, just building off the last topic that you were speaking to, Scripps Health in California, which was a nonprofit healthcare provider. They run 5 hospitals, 19 outpatient facilities, etc. Was taken down significantly by a recent ransomware attack in May.
Wow.
And again, this is public information. You can search for it. They've already announced all of this information, so I'm not disclosing any confidential information.
Go ahead.
But over 106 million in damages within that one attack.
Oh, great. And just out of curiosity, so when that happens, what's the prescription for the company that's hacked?
Well, so I can respond, or Will and Joy, you guys can respond. I think, see, this is the dynamic when you ask this type of question.
Right.
You get
no. I want everybody to get involved. This part of the show is a group think. Yeah.
So William, if you'll answer to that, and then I'll give another example if you don't mind.
Yeah. So in terms of my opinion, what should happen is one of the first people or entities that organization should call is their legal counsel to understand the legal ramification of the breach and to get counsel immediately in terms of how to move forward, because you're going to have to disclose. See, and this is where some of the regulations have changed over the years. Up until 16, 18 months ago, if you were the victim of a ransomware attack, you didn't have to disclose that as a breach. But the federal government has changed the regulations. So if you now are being held for ransom, they are considering that a breach, and you must disclose. And if you don't disclose and report to the appropriate authorities, right, and begin immediate remediation and communication around remediation activities, you will be fined. So it's right. It's not bad enough that you just got hit by ransom and you just got breached, and you're dealing with a fallout around that. But now if you don't disclose appropriately and report progress appropriately, right, then the feds are going to come after you as well. So
Yeah.
William, Joy, I don't know if you guys have more, but that's, in my opinion, the initial first step.
Yeah, and exactly the tie-on that I would make to that is that those disclosure laws that are starting to come out, what we don't hear about and what we will start hearing about is all of the millions of small businesses that are being hit with this. Because what is newsworthy are the great big breaches. You know, you have the SolarWinds and the T-Mobile and the oil lines and all of these huge newsworthy organizations, because we're talking millions and billions of dollars of damage across those. But it's not newsworthy when a little dentist office is hit, or it's not newsworthy when a marketing agency is hit, because they're not the big news. It's not the big numbers, but those are the ones that sadly are out there thinking that there's nothing that they could do to prevent it, or that they're not going to be a target. And so it'll be interesting to see as we start to get realistic reporting in of what those breaches are, how that expands across the news base. I mean, I know early on for HIPAA, there was what we used to call the wall of shame, where there's a website you can go to see all the medical practices that had been breached and penalized because of it. And some, so the wall of shame, I think more realistically, what we're starting to look at is that this is pervasive across every size of business, every industry, government, civilian, commercial, doesn't matter. It's a huge problem. And by the way, I'm a big fan of not talking numbers anymore, because I think that people are just so desensitized to hearing 1.1 billion. Not that it isn't important to have that information, but it's like numbers just start to all blend. And so what is, in my mind, the most important is to talk about the actual story behind these things and start to make people curious and how they can participate in the right answers.
Yeah, and I would definitely add, obviously, Mark, you're right on point with definitely you need legal counsel. And there's really three, arguably, entities you should have involved. One should be either your IT provider or your internal house, because obviously from a technical end, they'll help you identify the extent of the breach and things like that. But you also need to contact your insurance carrier as well, because they're going to tell you what's covered, what's not. And a lot of times, if you need a forensics investigation or incident response, it might be covered with your policy from a cost perspective. And then, like you mentioned, legal counsel, because they will tell you your exposure depending on what are the relevant regulations. But they'll also help guide a lot of the discovery, just to see how much is needed within the within your particular instance, how much discovery is needed if you need to notify affected clients. So.
Great. Jeff, you have anything on that, or you good?
Yeah, I mean, look, like what Mark was saying with some big ones, we're more around small and mid-sized business, like Joy was alluding to, with a small marketing firm or a dental firm. Like we were engaged and pulled into something where a wholesale and distribution, which is very much an industry you guys are involved in, and got hit by ransomware, and you can't call Target or Walmart and tell them, here's my order that I'm shipping you. Like, there's systems that happen. It's EDI based. Everything is super time sensitive. And, with those systems not up and running, you're out of business, and you're out of business for as long as it's down for. So the urgency for the business owner to unfortunately have to pay their ransom if they did not have the proper measures in place, like two-factor authentication, like, not having open ports on networks and stuff like that, it's too late at that point. Either you have to pay the ransom or go through a recovery process. And some businesses' recovery processes are not capable of restoring in a timely manner that's timely enough for the business to stay in business with their customer and meet their requirements with their customers. So unfortunately, that's why so much money is being made out there by the evil actors, because there's just no time to really think, right? You read about the meatpacking plant that got hacked recently. These are big firms, big and small, you know, it takes a long time to get companies into a good place. So it's not something that happens overnight. It's a strategy that you have to implement that could take 6 to 12 months or even more, depending on the size of the company, to enable all the controls and preventions that prevent these things from happening.
Right. Okay, thanks, Jeff. The question also is to everybody. You could jump in. What are the true costs of a cyber breach, and what are the hidden costs? Like, so I'm just from a business standpoint, I'm just asking, I'm taking a little further and saying, is it a percentage of the breach or the payoff, or like what, like in a general merchandise business, you have the cost of goods, you have freight, you have shipping, you have the, but what's the menu of costs when you get hacked?
I guess I'll start it off. I mean, you obviously you've got the direct cost, right? So if it's a ransomware attack, it's the cost of the ransom. There's also, you have to think about the cost of your downtime, because ransomware, a lot of times you don't have access to critical resources, critical services. So how long is it going to take? And, you know, Jeffrey kind of talked about that, you know, a lot of companies, their recovery plans are not sufficient to bring them up in a timely manner. So, I mean, how long is it going to take you to come back online? And during that time, you're still paying employees. You've got, you know, clients that might be waiting. So there's a lot of costs associated with that downtime that you have to consider. A lot of times it's difficult to put a number to it from a percentage, because there's just so much that you can kind of go down that rabbit hole as far as potential hidden costs associated with it.
Great.
One of the things I think people are not considering as much, in Mark and William both had alluded to this, is that exfiltration of data, you know, the new way that they are doing, holding your data hostage and not letting you access it until you pay the ransom. And if you refuse, they've already made a copy of the data and are threatening to expose that. Oftentimes that has PII, personally identifiable information, that there's a lot of laws around and penalties involved in if that's exposed. You also have intellectual property. You also have very embarrassing emails from the CEO to the, you know, CMO or whatever that is, that, you know, we saw that lesson learned with the Sony breach. There was like a lot of emails that I think it was the Democratic conference as well. You know, there's things that you do not want aired out in public. Every company has them. So how do you monetize that kind of a hit to your reputation? It's not even just that you were breached and have to admit you were breached, but it's all of the dirty laundry that might be let out there, or that IP that is just like the lifeblood of your organization.
I think that's a great point, Joy, and just kind of double clicking and building off of what you mentioned. Years ago, Deloitte did a fantastic infographic on this using an iceberg, right? So, and that analogy I think is a really good analogy. It's, hey, here's above the waterline, here are all the costs, right? It's the remediation costs, it's the assessment cost, it's right, it's the ransom cost, it's the hard cost.
Wow.
But what are the soft costs? So for example, what about your credit rating? What if you're going through, so and again, this was a great piece by Deloitte. So if you can search for it, you know, go find it. But it had a couple of case studies in there that talked about large organizations that were going through recapitalization, right? And so what was the impact to their ability to borrow money? Was directly impacted by the data breach, right? So their brand, their ability to attract and retain talent. Right? Because nobody wants to work for a company that's been breached, right? That's your brand, right? People that are sensitive or concerned about that, right? So there's all this under the water, kind of soft cost and soft impact, and then building on top of what William said. You know, look, if you're a $5 million company and your people go unproductive for a week. Right? I mean, there's very straightforward, you know, mathematical equations to figure out what the cost of that downtime is, right? You take, you know, amount of total hours missed in terms of production, you divide that into available, you know, man hours, and then you, right, divide that by the total revenue that your organization generates during that time. And so this can be significant. I think if you take a look at some of the research out there from the Ponemon Institute and others, and Ponemon assesses and surveys, organizations that have been breached from small, kind of emerging stage companies all the way up to global international companies. But they have a blended average of 3.9 million is the impact to an organization. And again, if you read the data in their reports, right, it could be as low as 100,000, right, or it could be into the hundreds of millions. But right, their average is about 3.9 million, just published over the last 24 months.
Okay, great. Thanks a lot. That's a lot of information. All right, to move this along, because we're doing a lot here. It's crazy. Jeff, you were right, by the way, about the questions. They really just keep going and going. So I'm going to try and put it up because we're not. I mean, we're going to continue, but I want to try and grab what we can grab here before we open it up for Q&A. So this was another question. So what should an employee be? What really should an employee be doing to take the security more seriously? If I'm on a screen, what am I doing as I'm working for Hedaya? I come in, what should I be doing? Should I be wearing like an armored guard before I turn on my screen? What should I be doing?
Well, I think there's two things on this. It's not only what should the employee be doing, but it's also what should the ownership be doing, and specifically around IT, right? You have to take a hardening stance. It's like your home, right? You leave the window open, leave the door unlocked, leave the door open. Like, this is what businesses are actually doing, and inviting criminals to walk into their businesses and just take everything and hurt them. So I think that's something that, needs to happen from the top down. And then on the employee side, where people do get picked off, there is a level of awareness that they need to be taking into account. There are tools and systems and offerings that allow companies to train their employees better to avoid those sorts of things. But I think it's a two-sided approach. One of them is you have to play defense on the system side, on the business side, and push that down the organization. That's what I feel.
Agreed. I think that culturally, the organization's leadership cannot be do as I say and not as I do. I think that's one of the biggest things that the C-suite, the CEO, and all the other members, president, oftentimes when I had my practice supporting businesses, it was that group that was the biggest offenders. They would click on anything. They figured it's everyone else's job to do what they're supposed to do, but I'm too busy, to pay attention to that. And all of the staff see that. All of the staff know that. It's really important that culturally it does get expressed from the stakeholders all the way across the board. But the other thing is that, Simon Sinek is famous for that, the why. So if the employees actually understand why they're being asked to do what they need to do, and if it's personal to them, then they will have buy-in and they will actually have a behavior modification. So it has to be compelling, if you teach them how to protect all of their own home equipment, their iPhone, their medical health records, how to look on the dark web to see what's been exposed. If you teach them how to do research on themselves to see what's publicly available, it's called open source intelligence, so that they could see if I was an attacker, how would I attack me? Like, if they actually start to understand just some of the basics and get the why of it, then they'll be a lot more responsive to helping the company, because then what they do at home is what they're going to be doing at the company. What they do at the company is what they're going to be doing at home. They don't all of a sudden change their behavior because they're on a different computer. People's habits are people's habits. That's what they do, right? So teach them across the board how to make that important. The other thing that I'll just mention real briefly is that if I had my dream come true, I would never have an employee sit in front of a policy, an Adobe PDF that's 6 pages long that says this is what you're supposed to do, and ask them to read it and sign it, because that is completely useless. Number one, have anybody besides me ever actually read one of those? I would guess not. But in the perfect world, somebody from information security, somebody from human resources, and somebody from marketing and communications would all sit down and they would have a powwow as how can we make onboarding our employees super fun and walk them through why every single piece of this policy is in place so that it's an engaging and like teamwork kind of environment. And they really take this on as, man, this company takes security seriously. Wouldn't that be amazing?
That would be, and I want, and that's phenomenal, Joy. That's phenomenal. Because I'll tell you, I recently read a book called Humor Seriously, and you should check it out. It's written by I think some Stanford, two women at Stanford professors, and it's really getting people to adhere to policies, whether it's cybersecurity or management or marketing or whatever it may be, through levity. And like, rather than like you're saying, here's this thing, sign it, and nobody even looks at it. But but bringing it through that type of a model, it's interesting that point that you brought up is really is some, because if someone's not interested from the get-go, this stuff is like it's too, it's not, they're not going to buy into it. They're not going to buy into it. That's a great point. Thank you.
Hey, Joy. I'm going to build on something you said. One of the things that we used to communicate and we were running around speaking at conferences about, a handful of years ago was telling executives you need to establish a cyber declaration in your company, right? So we all have mission, vision, core values, right? That's wall art, right? It goes up. High performing companies really promote that type of thing, right? They drive behaviors around that. Where is your cyber declaration? Have you established a declaration which says this is important to us? Defending and protecting employee and customer and intellectual property is critical. We're going to sign a declaration. Everybody's going to get indoctrinated into this, and we're going to integrate this into core values, into our vision, into our mission, and get serious about this. So
Right.
It's interesting to see when you're speaking and presenting that out there, people going, oh yeah, that makes sense. But one of the fun things that we were trying to do recently was, as you onboard new employees or as you're doing these all hands, why don't you do this? Here's an idea. Create an all hands breakout session and have the employees break up into groups and have those groups come up with ideas on how to hack and break into the company and take the company down.
That's beautiful, Mark.
Right? Get your employees involved in thinking like criminals, right? And then bubble up all of the best practices and ideas for defending and protecting that, right? And because I think from a behavior perspective, right, those employees will be like, oh yeah, hey, I saw so-and-so had this document laid out on the printer and I walked by and it had everybody's payroll on it. I would steal that and I'd take this but get them involved in that creative thinking.
Right. That's great. Thanks, guys. Okay, so we're way over time, but I'm gonna load in 2 more questions, and then we're gonna open up. If you guys want to still hang out a little bit, then we'll take some Q&A. So the next one is Jack Hedaya, and this is I guess an important to bring it to a financial impact. How does a cyber attack impact a company's financial situation? So Hedaya being a supplier of capital, what happens, Jack, if someone gets hacked and their bank is tapped out, and what do they do? How do they fund it? Tell us a little bit about how it works in Hedaya's world.
So the worst case scenario is that a company could be put out of business if all their systems are, if they lose control of their systems and they can't access their data, their history, or their data has been released into the public. It's very possible that the company, especially if they're smaller sized businesses or mid-sized businesses, will not be able to survive that kind of a breach. We have seen a bunch of times business email compromise where a client's email has been hacked. There'll be communications that were familiar, about a conversation that was ongoing, and instead of sending the money here, send it elsewhere, or we change factories or suppliers or things like that. First time we saw it was about 10 years ago or 12 years ago. Since then, we saw the risk of tens of thousands of dollars going to the wrong place, or hundreds of thousands of dollars for clients going to the wrong place. And we've adjusted our systems to try and reduce those risks. And over the years, we've had 5 to 10 instances where we've prevented clients from substantial financial loss. So it is a real risk. It's at every size. It's not only large corporate, it is smaller and mid-sized businesses that also need to be aware and put in the protections in place to protect themselves in this environment.
Okay, great. Last question for everybody, and then we'll take some Q&A if you guys are all right with it. What are some of the best practices you would recommend to a client? And anybody who wants to jump in no particular order.
I mean, I could just say a couple of things.
So go ahead.
Sorry. Yeah, I mean, some of them are implementing strategies, which happens, through having the right people around your organization. That could be a consultant, it could be a cybersecurity firm, could be an IT managed service provider, or maybe a little bit of everything. It could be internal IT. But you want to have the right eyes and conversations talking about these things, because you do have to implement strategies and you do have to be tactical about it. I mean, we could go down to the nitty gritty, like making sure that, you have two-factor authentication and then user security awareness training. These are all things that will come out of those planning sessions. But I think having the right team, having a cybersecurity specialized firm, audit and do a gap assessment so that you can eliminate those risks through means like I just mentioned. I think that's the most important thing, is starting the conversations and executing upon strategies.
Who's next? Joy.
Well, obviously, I'm going to say train your staff and, try to shift the culture as incrementally as you can. The other thing, though, is that, when I used to do IT for so many years, I encourage my clients and the clients of other IT professionals to get second opinions on the infrastructure. It's a lot of these small businesses have had the same IT guy for 10, 15 years. And for whatever reason, they may or may not have any knowledge of how to currently protect from cybersecurity threats, or even really be, frankly, that interested in finding out what they don't know, because it's all about their job security. So a second opinion is really important, not just to rely on one person for year after year after year. Do them a favor and yourself a favor and have a third party come in and take a look at it.
That's a great point. And I can tell you, I was a nonprofit I ran before I joined Hedaya. When I joined, for about 8 or 10 years, we had the same IT company. And I was like, I wasn't really understanding IT, but I was understanding business. And I said, it doesn't make sense. So I said, well, we had them for 8 years, the board said. So I said, who cares if you had them for 100 years? I know nothing about IT, but I know about business, and they're a disaster. So I brought in another IT company and I said, listen, I know zero. These guys know less than me, and they're our guys. So tell me what you could do. And they blew me away. They were inline pricing and their service was amazing. They taught me what I should be knowing and what I should be protecting. And more importantly, they made our data more efficient and more, and brought more, let's say, education to us on how to monetize our data. So I think that's a great. In the professional world, people get comfortable, whether it's lawyers, accountants, IT, and I'm not changing my accountant. Why not? I mean, I'm not saying you should throw them out, but if you have somebody else that's going on that has something that's going to improve your business, then why shouldn't you do it? I think that's a great point.
Especially in cybersecurity, because you just don't know what you don't know.
Right.
I agree with Joy. Like we've changed up our, we actually request our clients to bring in cybersecurity auditors that are not us, so that another set of eyes could be looking at it. Because it's just as big as the ocean at this point. There's so much to deal with. So we see that as a big benefit.
Right. Okay. Anybody a point? Will have a point? And Molly?
I was going to build on what Jeffrey mentioned as well. We do the same from a cybersecurity perspective, especially in the testing and assessing services. As we'll recommend to our own clients as well, especially for a penetration test, is to, you want to have another party look at that as well, because things change. And to Joy's point, cybersecurity is such an emerging, things change on a blink of an eye. New threats come out, new vulnerabilities come out. So you really have to stay ahead of that, and you have to make sure whoever your provider is also staying ahead and staying in touch with what's going on.
Great, thank you. Okay, I think we're good. Molly, any questions out there? You have any questions?
Yeah, we have a few questions. The first one is, how often should businesses conduct security awareness training, and are there any that are most effective?
Joy.
It should be ongoing, really. I think a lot of the compliance requirements just say once a year, but honestly, at a minimum, once a month, some kind of online training. But I prefer to have special guests come in and speak. A lot of times there's like free experts that will come in and just talk to your group. There's a ton of free online training, even on YouTube. I have found the funniest videos, like literally make me cry. I'm laughing so hard, that are great cybersecurity training. There's newsletters, there's gamification, there's so many different things that you can do really inexpensively. Like, you don't have to look at training your staff as something that's going to be a business disruption or an expensive endeavor. Oftentimes it's the least expensive thing that you can do, and one of the most impactful.
Thank you. All right, Molly, what else you got?
Another question is there anything specific to small businesses that they can do to strengthen their security, or is it the same across the board?
I would say, security is there are some basic things you can do, certain things that you should be doing, but security should really be tailored towards your environment, to your business, because security by its nature is going to instill restrictions, and you want to make sure that those restrictions don't interfere with whatever your business functions are, but you can still perform those business functions in a safe and an effective manner. But I would say I would start first with looking at your business. What are your critical services? What are your critical functions? Specifically data, when it comes around data and the use of technology, how am I using that technology? Am I sharing that with others? Am I sharing data? Am I providing access? So once you start looking at those questions, that'll start the conversation to help identify areas where you can increase your security posture.
I would also weigh in and say, double clicking on what Joy said earlier is, and also what William said, which I think is critical, is understand how you as a leader are thinking about this topic, and assess or survey how your employees are thinking about this topic. Is this just a topic that they don't think about? So you need to understand that. So that's your current state. So understanding how you're thinking about this and how you're approaching this topic, right, internally, and then engaging some type of expert to do a current state assessment of the environment, your security controls, and your technologies, to even understand where your risk is at. Because it's one thing to sit around the room, right, and talk about it. It's another thing to actually look at hard data and say, oh my God, we didn't know we had all of these risks. Hey, we have a bunch of stuff in the cloud, and we didn't even know that the cloud environment was unsecure. We thought it was secure, right? And so it's really understanding where your people at, in terms of how you're thinking about this and how you're behaving, and then where's your environment at, and then create your baseline, and to Will's point, build a layered security approach from there. It's not just about tech.
Right.
It's about controls, it's about awareness, it's about policies, procedures, it's about changing behavior, which, as Joy pointed out, and she's an expert in that.
Right. Thank you. All right, I think we're way over time, but we'll take one more question. What do you got, Molly?
Someone asked, would you say clients are more often than not advised to pay the ransom?
Good question.
I guess I'll kick that off. It's difficult because they have your critical assets, they have access to your systems, and if you haven't done enough to to prepare. You know, if you don't have the backups, if you don't have that recovery process, most companies opt for paying the ransom. But you have to consider that you're still dealing with cyber criminals. So just because you pay the ransom, you're not guaranteed to get your systems back. I mean, it's not in their interest for you not to get it back, because since it is a business model, but you're also not guaranteed that either they won't be back or they won't sell your access to somebody else that then is going to attack you again. So you want to make sure that you know who you're dealing with. Ideally, I think the way it works now is with insurance companies, they'll be the ones dealing with the attackers. Just, you know, you really don't want to deal with them directly yourself. You should either have your insurance do it. In my previous life, in another cybersecurity company, we had former FBI folks that would deal with the cyber criminals because they knew how to kind of elicit information. Maybe how did you get in, you know, and they were able to tell, you know, just elicit a lot of information that would be helpful in the future to help prevent it again. But, you know, that's really a business decision when it comes to that. You know, how valuable is that, and what is the impact if you don't pay that ransom? So.
Right. Okay, so that's the end of the questions. It's totally amazing, but I can't let you go because I have one question myself. And I was thinking that this thing, like we did 3 of these already, and this is like totally blew my mind. This whole, so it's like, it's a really a major business issue, and the education was phenomenal. But so is there more cloud, more problems? Is there anything that is lock tight? Is there anything that you could put your data in that nobody on earth could touch?
I mean, I could take, like, the first thing we started out with business email compromise.
Right.
The only reason that happens is because the company or the user didn't enable 2-factor authentication. It's almost impossible to get around it without that, short of impersonating someone's phone number and you know, going to the cell phone store and grabbing it. But the bottom line is, yes, it's cloud, but yes, it's accessible to some degree if they're able to gather someone's password, which is easy to discover these days because everyone uses the same password everywhere, and some sites have been hacked. So I think it comes back to like auditing and implementing the safeguards. So you, just because you have, you know, all these things that have the capabilities of doing great things doesn't mean the switches are turned on. So, and it's not like it's simple either. Like it has to be done by professional IT staff or managed service provider, etc. That's what I personally find.
And Erwin, I would say, to answer your question, it would be a desktop computer powered off, locked in a closet somewhere. That would be the perfect, most secure, but obviously not very useful. So we have to think of that balance. There you go.
Joy's got it. Well, guys, it was fun. It was entertaining. It was educational, and it was like, I mean, so important. And hopefully, maybe we could do a part 2 down the road in a couple of months, because I'm sure this changes daily. So really, thanks to everybody. Have a great, be safe, and speak to you soon.
Thank you.
Yep. Thank you.
Thank you all.
Thank
Stay
you.
safe.
That was really great.